Hi everyone and welcome to this week's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about harnessing the potential of youth, particularly within growth businesses. We expect the webinar to last no more than an hour and we'll send through a recording afterwards. We'll also send through a feedback form. We'd really appreciate your insights. We can make sure that the webinars that we run on an ongoing basis are as productive as possible. If I move to the next screen, I'll introduce you to our panelists. We've got three fantastic panelists joining me today. So first up, we've got Lara, who's Chief Science Officer at Arctic Shores, a British tech startup leader in game-based assessment. Their mission is to help companies make better people choices and people to make better career choices through bias-free, behaviour-based assessments. Lara joined Arctic Shores as Chief Scientific Officer from the onset of the company, developing the scientific rationale underlying the existing portfolio and growing the evidence base that supports its validity. Second off, we've got Esther, who's Programme Director at 10,000 Black Interns. They help transform the horizons and prospects of young Black people in the United Kingdom by offering paid work experience across a wide range of industries, as well as world-class training and development. Before joining the 10,000 Black Interns team, Esther founded a social enterprise in 2015 with the focus of increasing the pipeline of Black state comprehensive educated students into Oxford, Cambridge and Russell Group institutions. And last but no means least is Jack, who heads up the youth group. I was going to give you a job title, Jack, but I know you don't like job titles, so I'll just say heads up the youth group. Jack's an award-winning young entrepreneur, public speaker and subject matter expert on youth, and is publicly known as the UK's Chief Youth Officer. The youth group is building the world's largest and most connected marketplace and community for young people, with one aim: to help improve the odds for young people across the world to achieve their full potential in work. Thank you to all three of you guys for joining us this morning, and very much looking forward to your perspectives on this really interesting topic. Really want it to be a very interactive session today. We're going to spend the vast majority of our time running through Q&A. I'll give a very brief overview before chairing that Q&A. It's going to be far more engaging for everyone joining to hear your questions rather than mine. So please do put them into the Q&A box here, and I'll do my best to run through all of them. So do add those as we go. Quick background on me and my business, Instant Impact. So I'm founder and co-CEO of Instant Impact. We're in-house recruitment experts. We work as an extension of our clients' HR function to provide the team, expertise, marketing and technology that they need to make high quality diverse hires directly. And we work with all of our clients to help them cope with global trends, be that the introduction of remote working right the way through to improving diversity, and we run webinars on all of those topics. We also do a lot of work in the early careers space, so this is certainly a topic that's very close to home for us. So a quick bit of background then before jumping into the main purpose and running through Q&A. We're undergoing a time of change that is truly unprecedented in most of our lifetimes, and it's been HR people and talent teams that have been in the driving seat. We've had to marshal our companies through so much over the last year, whether that's rewriting the rule book for COVID or responding to the global momentum behind diversity initiatives that followed the Black Lives Matter protests last year. You could say that we've been forced to re-examine the way we look at talent across the board. At Instant Impact, we prefer to say that we've been given the opportunity to create a better working world and environment for all of our businesses. This pandemic has taught us that to thrive in our rapidly changing world, we need to be agile and we need to be able to adapt. We need to learn quickly because after all, skills can be picked up, but drive, motivation and personality cannot be taught in all instances. So in addition to the skills that companies value, young people have had time to reflect on what matters most for them in their future employment. Forbes described Gen Z as being remarkably fluid in their approach to the future, and recommend that employers be as nimble as possible in convincing Gen Z that you're the right fit for them to work. As Millennials and Gen Z are making up more and more of the workforce, over 50% according to some research, it's crucial that organisations carefully consider how they're attracting the new generation of leaders. And it's also crucial for us to consider today the impacts of COVID, because it's one of the groups that's been hardest hit during this period. A survey by Deloitte found that almost 30% of Gen Z and a quarter of 25 to 30-year-olds either lost their jobs or were put on temporary unpaid leave at some point during the crisis. So that's background over. I think I want to move as quickly as possible onto the Q&A, and I think there are 4 key themes that we want to cover today. Those being the impact of COVID, the potential of youth, attraction, and then assessment. And that's how we've built our panel today to bring expertise in each of those different areas. As I said, please do send questions through in the Q&A box. But to start us off, I'd love to pass over to you, Jack, in the first instance, and ask, how do you think the pandemic has impacted the youth in the UK?
So going into the lockdown, we was all naive. We all thought we'd be locked up for 3 weeks and then would be able to get back to normal life. So companies weren't really geared up. Even young people weren't even geared up to what was coming ahead a year later. It's been unprecedented, this absolutely nightmare for young people, and not just in terms of jobs opportunities, but the average young person who has less than £13 savings to their name entering the lockdown. It's been overwhelming and it's been a very stressful time. And young people have lacked the understanding and the skill set to how to apply for jobs in a virtual world. And when they turn to people around them, they don't know because they've not really applied for jobs in the virtual world. So it's left this kind of, this two playing field where companies want to do well, but they have to pause. They're worried about if they hire young people, what does that look like on their furlough workers and the ones that they're making redundant? Young people have just left university education and they're thinking, but all I want to do is get up and get into work. So you're left with this two-sided kind of trying to balance each other out, which it causes a little bit of a nightmare. Then what you've got is you've got everyone drinking from the same glass. Instead of having 5 pints of water on the table and young people being able to choose, everyone now is going towards 1 pint glass and that water is emptying. So there's lack of opportunity, there's lack of understanding, and young people at the moment are feeling very overwhelmed. That's the key word here. The pandemic has made young people feel more overwhelmed.
Yeah. And Esther, in terms of what you've seen more recently as we start to come out of the pandemic, have you seen a pickup from an early career hiring perspective? Have you seen more interest from companies that you're working with over at 10,000 Black Interns?
Yeah, so it's a funny one, and I echo everything that Jack has said, and we've definitely seen that play out in, you know, the launch of 100 and then progressing through to 10,000 Black Interns. The naivety at the beginning. I mean, all of us at the beginning of the pandemic thought that, you know, things would be over pretty quickly. 100 Black Interns was launched prior to the pandemic, so around August last year, and we had a massive influx of firms signing up, obviously under the assumption that things would be back to normal by the time internships start this summer. Lo and behold, fast forward to this summer, we're fast approaching it, and we're actually having that very serious conversation with all of our participating firms around navigating our internships to virtual internships for this year. And, you know, we're running a number of sessions with them to help them prepare for the reality of that, as well as for the interns, because I wouldn't say that the opportunity level has reduced, because we're seeing, again, in the marketplace, a lot of firms are, you know, they're out of office, they're prepping for a world where the working environment is much more virtual. So, you know, we are seeing firms engage with that, and, you know, fingers crossed this time next year, we won't necessarily have to deal with the same problem with this at the same scale. But I would say the opportunity is firms are doing a lot, basically, to try and navigate from, you know, the physical to the virtual. And we're definitely seeing that play out under the program. But it's a lot to shift. It definitely is a lot to shift. And it's a lot to ask for both the firms and for the students, particularly from an access perspective, because we know that there are links between access and you know, internet, and having the resource and the finances, for example, to buy monitors and set yourself up virtually, even whether or not you even have the space within your home to have a desk and, you know, quiet to get work done. So these are definitely things that are becoming much more of a reality that we're having to deal with as well.
Yeah. If we look at then so harnessing the potential of youth within businesses. Hopefully we've got lots of people on the call today thinking of either hiring people in the group that we're talking about or thinking about hiring people in the group that we talk about. Laura, the companies that you work with over at Arctic Shores, where you're looking at the different forms of assessment, particularly on the early career programs, have you noticed any tangible change in skills that companies have been prioritizing over the last year because of the change of working environment?
So not much about the changes in the skills, because we don't yet know exactly what new skills we need. I mean, we don't have any evidence to say we need new skills to work remotely. What we're seeing is a massive influx of new applications and a little bit of a panic on what we're going to do, because normally the first sift is a CV still, and now it's unfeasible to do that. So companies need more and more ways to identify talent very early in the pipeline, and that's what we're trying to help to give that, you know, that first filter that is really based on the people potential rather than whatever you can see on the CV, because it's quite easy to look at the CV and what do you look for? You look for internships, you look for degrees, where did they go to uni? And we know how that is plagued with bias. And now is not a good time to fall into that trap of bias, because everybody's struggling. And so we need to do something a little bit better.
Makes sense. And then, Jack, if you're talking to people considering hiring, either, well, I could hire a proven entity, someone who's done this role for 5, 10 years plus, or I could hire someone at the very beginning of the year, very beginning of their career. What unique skills do you think that latter group, the individuals that you work with over at the youth group, what unique skills do you think they can bring to a business that maybe others can't?
So I would I'd say that you do need to hire on potential. You need to hire on the potential. We recently worked with Capita and Arctic Shores and on the assessment centre on the tests that they did, and the talent and the energy and the enthusiasm that came through, one, the assessment, but two, just their showcases that they did, their video showcases. So I would flip the narrative and look at the attitude, look at the potential. Do they have an interest in what you're doing and what your organisation's doing? A lot of young people want to get into digital marketing. They don't really understand what digital marketing is. So don't try and over confuse them. Don't try and make them feel like they're the expert, but take them on the potential. Do they have the duvet flip to get out of bed, turn up to work every day and be passionate about the job that they're doing? Secondly, do they have the basic, and I say basic because this confuses everyone, the basic skills that you need to work remotely? It's really important. Do you have the basic skills? And now we can have a big debate on what basic skills is. A couple of weeks ago, I asked the Minister of Digital, what does digital skills mean? And they didn't know. So really what it means to the young person. So your organisation has to really break down what does digital skills mean and what is the basics for that young person to join. So if they've got the duvet flip, if they've got the basic digital skills, don't worry about the CV. I've gone on BBC News recently and say, rip up the CV. And it got me in a bit of trouble. But you don't have to rip up the CV. But if you're looking for someone who is from a different type of background, from a council estate, from a BAME community, don't look at the CV, look at the potential, because they have potential and there is so much talent out there at the moment. We just need to give them the opportunity.
Great, and we'll come on in a bit more detail to assessment later on, and I know Lara, really keen to hear your thoughts and Arctic Shores perspective, particularly around how we can assess for potential. So hold me to that. We'll be coming back to that, guys. I wanted to pick up on one of the elements that you mentioned there, and it ties into a great question we've just had in from David, which I'll put to you, Esther, which is, do you feel that employers may be hesitating on hiring young or inexperienced people currently due to onboarding likely to be remote? and how can hiring companies combat this? I think it goes to the point that Jack was mentioning just before of making sure you've got those people who can thrive in a remote environment. And what do you think companies need to be looking out for on that topic?
I'm sure there are companies out there that are hesitating, but I'll definitely say through what we've seen via 10,000 Black Interns program, it definitely doesn't feel like it, because everything has happened, before and during the pandemic. With 100 Black Interns, it was purely focused in investment management, and it was supposed to be, as the name suggests, 100 interns going into industry. We had 200 firms sign up, 40 to 50 on a waiting list. And that was just investment management. And at our last count, we have, close to 500 interns going into investment management and other industries this year. So in the summer of 2021. So we're really seeing that enthusiasm be maintained even through this. And I think the conversation is more about how do we make sure that we can still bring the same value to the candidates, and they can still bring the same value to us as an organization in this virtual world, and make sure that there aren't any barriers in front of them in order for them to successfully deliver that. And as I said, it's a conversation about making sure that, they have monitors, they still get FaceTime, there's that extra input that's required from the firm perspective. One, to make sure that they feel welcome, because I was having a conversation with a friend the other day, and particularly when it comes to access and the lack of visibility, when we're talking about race here, investment management, we know, is a very white, very male, and very inaccessible industry in many ways. And what we were discussing is, a lot of the time, feeling welcome in an environment, whether virtually or physically, is the most important thing. You have to be able to feel welcome there before you can even consider what your job description is. So, we're having those conversations with firms where a lot of them, and, kudos to them, are, for example, sending out packages, personalized video messages to each of these interns, and making sure they know exactly who everybody in their team is, such that they have that FaceTime, they have that visibility, even when we're not face-to-face in offices. Fast forward to 10,000 Black Interns, again, we are seeing a lot of uptake, because we have more than 750 firms signed up to that program, and that's delivery in the summer of 2022. But to answer the latter part of your question, in terms of what firms need to be doing, it's about making sure that FaceTime is there. It's about making sure the junior hires, because this is what we're here to talk about. It's the early careers part of things, making sure the junior hires feel welcome. And when we're in a world of hyper visibility, whereby if I want to understand what the culture of a firm is like, we no longer live in a world where I need to wait till I'm hired by that firm and experience what things are like on the floor. I can see how they've responded to particular global issues. I can see on the internet what statements they've put out off of the back of particular societal problems. And that gives me a good indication as to the standpoint of the firm, and whether or not that marries with my beliefs, with my morals. And particularly when we're considering millennials and Generation Z, there is a lot less patience for nonsense amongst those generations. And we are no longer aiming to work for the same firm for 20 years. We don't want to be lifers. We don't want to sit at the same desk for decades. That's not an ambition of your common millennial or Gen Z candidate. It's more so about, what can this firm give me? And I feel like firms need to understand that there has been that shift in power, and they need to do a lot more, particularly in this virtual world, to make sure that they are selling themselves to candidates, and make sure that they don't have that gap in their workforce whereby they're unable to attract the talent that they need in order to have a sustainable workforce.
Fantastic. I'm jotting down loads of things that we'll be coming back to. Love the lifers comment, and we'll talk more about attraction. Guys, please do keep the questions coming. I've got plenty, but I'm sure you've got better ones. So please do keep putting them in the Q&A box as we go. The purpose today, talking about harnessing the potential of youth within growth businesses. I think one of the things that describes growth businesses is breakneck pace, and maybe when compared to some of the blue chips that have also already been mentioned on this call, haven't necessarily got quite such rigorous processes around onboarding, haven't necessarily got a full training program that anyone newly inducted into that organization can go through. I'd like to pass over to you each in turn for one or two things that would be your top pieces of advice to a growing business when onboarding someone with relatively little experience maybe go to you first on that, Jack. If you're starting from scratch, what do you think are the most important things to get a new member of the team up to pace and feeling like part of the team as quickly as possible?
So I think the first thing is allyship. It's really important that you pair the young person with someone who can act as their ally in the organisation. When you're going into any organisation, it's tough. You've got a lot of navigation to do. You're a bit overwhelmed. So the first thing is working out who is that allyship for that young person going in. It's really important that they have someone they can turn to just when they need to take a breather. So that's number one. Number two, make it very clear up front what the expectations are for that young person in the first 30, 60 and 90 days. Because I see a number of times that young people go in, they've been sold a dream and they expect it to be one thing. And when they get into day 32, it's completely different. They lose their duvet flip, they get unmotivated, and it all goes downhill from there. So as long as you really over communicate, like Esther said, around the FaceTime, the allyship, and have a clear plan, a playing card for that young person to navigate that organisation in the 30, 60, 90 days, I think you're more likely to retain young people in the long term by doing those two simple things.
Brilliant. And just quickly touching on allyship, when you think of allyship working really well, are you seeing allies at a peer level or someone more senior within the organisation? Where do you think it works best, or is it a blend that you would recommend?
I reckon it's a blend, but it's most important that the person who's the ally looks and sounds like them a little bit, so they can really understand the young person. It's no point putting a 60-year-old finance guy with an intern who's in marketing, because they might just not, they're still an allyship, but it just may not work. So I think having the allyship with common interest and experiences is really important. I know that's hard for some organisations to try and find, but try and match the ally as much as you can to that young person's interest.
Brilliant. Esther, over to you. What would be your top tip to a growing organisation who hasn't necessarily got that infrastructure already in place to make that process of getting a young person up to speed as productive as possible?
Yeah, I think Jack definitely stole the point that came to mind immediately, because, you know, the key point that we're raising here is that this is a company that's new. They don't necessarily have, you know, an embedded structure. They don't necessarily have the visibility in terms of race or LGBTQ or whatever it may be. So when you're literally starting from the ground up, I would echo what Jack said, and it's super important that the PR matches the reality, because again, just echoing heavily here about the differences between for previous generations and millennials and Gen Z, the patience levels are super thin. So if they get into a company and they realize that this is not the dream that you sold me, the chances of them staying are very, very low, very, very low, because the mentality is, and I'm seeing this even in the pandemic, the people are happy to jump ship even without having a plan for their next steps. And that is slightly different. We're seeing shifts in that from, you know, what companies may have seen in previous years of hiring. So in order to have a sustainable workforce, you need to make sure that the reality really does match the messaging that you have put out there.
Bro, and Lara, you've got the best slot in terms of having most time to think, but the worst slot in terms of Jack and Esther both having had it already had a pass. What's your view on this one?
So in terms of internship and what we should make sure that we give, especially now that we're operating virtually, I think there's two parts of an internship. One is to learn the trade, and one is to learn how to trade. So it's about learning those processes and tasks. Say, for example, my intern will want to learn about science and psychology. How do we build an assessment? But then at the same time, there will be a lot of those scenarios and those moments in which they will pick on the way in which I interact with other people, in the way in which I prioritize my work. So those are all the things that I feel may be slightly overlooked in a virtual internship that needs to be really thought about really clearly, and there should be a conscious effort to still give that sort of value to a young person entering the company. So I think, you know, when if I have to think about all the interns that I had when they started and when they ended, you know, they started sounding either like me or my colleagues by the end of their internship, because they picked on that language, they picked on the way in which we interact with each other, what's good to say, what's not good to say. And I think that is going to be a challenge for companies to still provide that sort of layer on top of providing the skills and the knowledge that's specific to the role.
Awesome. Well, we've had a great another question, which I think takes us on quite nicely to attraction. And guys, please do keep the questions coming in. So the question here is: we're a small charity, or let's say small business for wider appeals. So it's not specific to charity, but charity or business, and our average age is not young. It would be great to attract younger people into the business/charity, but recruitment for those roles, especially because we haven't done them many times before, is tough. How can we attract young people to work for us? Maybe go to you on that one, Esther, to start us off with.
It's a difficult one. How can we attract young people? I think one thing and it sounds super simple, but I think it's so important and is often overlooked. You need to speak to who it is you're looking to attract and ask them what they want, what they're looking for in a desirable workplace. It's impossible to play the guessing game, particularly if, you know, it's a firm where the average age is much higher than those that you are trying to attract into the workforce. My suggestion would genuinely be, because charities, you said it's a charity, right? That this question has come from. Yeah, it's depending on what the charity does, it's quite a unique sector in terms of the nature of the role. So I think it's super important to actually reach out to young people, maybe hold some focus groups and understand what it is they are looking for in a desirable workplace, because it's impossible to play the guessing game. And well, it's highly unlikely that you'll play the guessing game and get it right. You only know what you know, and it sounds very simple, but it's definitely something that I see working with other organizations that we have worked with.
Right. And then taking that one a little bit more broadly then, Jack, so I think everyone's aware that Gen Z expectations and young expectations are different than previous generations. Esther's already referred to the fact that you're not necessarily expecting to go into work and be a lifer, be behind the same desk for 10 years. What things do you think businesses, and particularly growth businesses, should be doing to make themselves as attractive as possible to young people as a place to work?
So I use this analogy. You can create a party, but you don't put the right music on, young people won't dance. So you have to go where the young people are. So your previous question around where can they go? Well, Hester's company does amazing work. A lot of young people that are looking for work. Reach out to communities and organisations that are already got a community of youth, and reach out to them and ask them for help. So I'd say any organisation out there who are looking to engage youth, no matter what level you are at, is look around you and think, okay, who in my local area is supporting the local youth? Where are the young people dancing? And who's got that network, and how can we create smart partnerships to build that pipeline and start getting aware with the young people in that organisation? Don't think that you can do it all yourself. There's smart organisations like Esther's, like Arctic Shores out there for a reason, for doing just this. So partner. I believe faster with partners, and focus on what you do, and let other organisations that deal with youth every day take it off your hands and support you with the journey.
Great advice. If I think that the list of perks that companies offer now is probably the longest it's ever been. Employee benefits spanning everything from mental health through to pensions and everywhere in between, and new topics coming up almost monthly, from how much we're going to be working in the office, how much flexibility is there going to be, so on and so forth. If you're starting with a blank slate, which I don't think anyone on the call will be, but if you were starting with a blank slate and you said, right, I've got to pick the things that are going to matter most when it comes to EVP for a business to be as attractive as possible to young people, where would you start? And Laura, I'm conscious that you had your vaccination yesterday, so you're feeling a little worse for wear today, and B, you're going to come in heavy on the assessment side of things. So I'll offer that one to you if you want, but also know that you've got assessment coming up soon if you'd rather wait for that.
Well, I can answer quickly, and I can tell you how I would try to attract talent, and is about taking the next step in terms of who you are as a company as well as what you give. There's a lot more focus on what the company stands for, as Esther was saying, like this type of visibility. So we will know if I have two equally attractive company, we will know the one, I will know the one that matches my philosophical and societal dreams the most, and the one that I think is the most innovative and so forth. So I think it's just certain things that in the past were a huge plus, now they're starting to be taken for granted. So if you're looking at, for example, D&I statements, go back 10 years, 15 years, and if a company had a clear D&I statement, that means that they really did believe in that. Whereas now it's flipped. So you don't have a D&I statement, and you're not making a conscious effort in that. That means that, wow, there must be something really wrong with that company. So the tables are flipped a little bit. But yes, I will let Jack and Esther talk more about this, and I'll jump in back when we're talking about selection and assessment and all that.
Perfect. Well, maybe go over to you then on that one, Esther. What things where would you be starting?
Yeah, I think I would answer that question by giving a little story, a real life story. This happened last week. So a friend of mine works for a big financial firm, and they had a number of job openings that they specifically wanted. This is outside of 10,100 black interns, by the way, but they had an open role that they wanted to attract young people to apply to. And the message was, okay, can you send this around to your network and get people to apply? I was like, of course, I'll do that. I mean, I'm in a number of group chats full of, black young professionals. I sent the message into one of the particular chats, and the response was, absolutely not working for this firm. No, neo-slavery, won't have a life. All sorts of comments like that. And
neo-slavery, wow.
Neo-slavery in the sense,
glad you didn't mention the firm's name.
I don't know, neo-slavery in the sense that, that's the perception from the outside looking in, that you don't have your own life, you can't do things, and and bearing in mind that the younger generations, I like to refer to them as generation side hustle. Like, everybody has their own little thing on the side that they are doing that they need and want time for. I would definitely say that, for all firms, not necessarily just larger firms, because, there's nothing wrong with having a very hard-working culture. But what I believe is that one of the key things to attracting younger talent nowadays is being able to give that reassurance that it's more so about working smart. How effective are you in your role? Do you execute on the key deliverables of your job description, as opposed to how many hours did you spend in office this week? So I think that that's a really important part of, highlighting the culture within a firm, and that could lead to attracting the younger talent when they have that reassurance that, yes, I work for X, Y, and Z company, but also I have other aspects of my identity that I have the time, freedom, and headspace to explore.
Love it. Awesome. And Jack, is there anything that would jump to mind for you on that one that you would have right up there as priority number one from an attraction perspective?
What Esther said around the side hustle generation is spot on. Young people want space, and we made the mistake internally in my organisation having a 5-day working week. We're now 4-day. It's opened up. They're more ambitious. They love what they do. Last week, someone went and painted a garden fence in their own time on Friday. We still pay them on the Friday to go and do that. I think along with time to work on the side hustle, I think there's two more really important things, and that's well-being and financial well-being. And they both come in, mental well-being and financial well-being, because at the end of the day, mental health it affects all of us, whether you're feeling overwhelmed, stress, anxiety. We all get it. We all get anxious about something, no matter who you are, our experience you are. So having a safe space where young people can thrive and share and share their concerns is really important. But also there needs to be financial well-being. This young person is working and earning money. I believe it's a company's responsibility to support that young person how to read their first payslip, what they should do and not to overspend. Do they have an emergency savings account? And certain things in place. So I believe the most important packages, along with letting young people do their side hustle, is making sure that you have something around well-being, and that is mental and physical well-being, and then something around financial well-being and education around that. And I believe that those are the things, along with the purpose, doing the right thing, having a core mission, and everyone understanding what the North Star is and where you're heading. I think those are the perks, if we talk it in terms of perks that you get on the Google website when you go and work for Google kind of thing. Young people are not really interested in the slide anymore. That was a couple of years ago. Yeah, the slide's a nice thing to have, but it's now more about what are you doing to look after me outside of work rather than in.
Makes sense. And Graham, we've had a question in from Molly on this topic around what's the importance of, so we talked about mental health, financial well-being, mission, purpose. Where in the list for you guys would training and development come into this question from an attraction perspective? And I'll maybe go straight back to you on that, Jack.
So training and development is really important, but I also believe it's bespoke. So it's what I see is a lot of organisations put a standard training program that doesn't suit everyone. It really doesn't. So what we've seen work is a list of options. When you go to a restaurant, you can decide what you want on the menu. So if you're putting a plan together, create a training menu, a menu with different options. Not every young person wants to learn a certain part or needs to, actually, because if you focus on everything, you focus on nothing, and you become the expert in absolutely nothing. So have an option where young people can choose and pick in their time on what they want to do, rather than trying to teach it like school, where today in maths we're going to learn A, B, and C. So I think you need an option of a menu so young people can pick and choose where they want to do. Also, that gives the young person the opportunity to tailor their career and build unique skills to the intern next to them.
Love that, Jack. Great insight. And Esther, you mentioned before lifers and the fact that a lot of young people don't see work that way. A lot of the companies that we work with, we have a lot of conversations around how can we improve retention, how can we reduce churn, and that's an objective for lots of businesses, as I'm sure everyone here is aware. What things would you focus on as a business to improve retention, and not necessarily encourage people to be lifers, but to encourage longevity within role?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think the biggest thing when it comes to retention from in terms of groups and demographics that are underrepresented within that particular workforce, the culture is just really important. We can't neglect how a person feels when they are at their desk, how a person feels when they're away from their desk, thinking, what are my colleagues potentially saying or doing, how they feel with regards to, or what the reality is, should I say, with regards to how quickly they'll be promoted in comparison to their counterparts who may look differently to them or speak differently to them. I think those are the most important things when it comes to retention, because as I said, that even with regards to the points that we're making about making sure PR matches reality, I think in the vast majority of cases it doesn't. And when you go into a firm, sometimes it may be okay for the employee that, okay, this is slightly different to what I thought, but I'm going to ride it out. That may be the mentality. However, we need to ask the question as to whether or not the culture within the firm is even conducive to that particular person's success. And that's really the biggest thing. I think if you speak to firms who have high staff turnovers, particularly at the junior level, and if you get into their exit interview data, you will see reoccurring themes. It's about the culture of the firm. It's about the work-life balance or lack thereof. So I'd really encourage firms to focus on that and make sure that, you know, some of the points have been mentioned by, you know, myself, Jack and Lara throughout this panel, that the importance of mentorship, the importance of sponsorship, and the importance of somebody feeling as though all they need to do is show up, execute their job description, and they will have a successful career, because that should be the equation. 1 + 1 = 2, but unfortunately that's not always the case.
And Lara, Jack, anything that you'd want to add on that one in terms of improving retention?
Just be kind humans. This is really bluntly. Remember, you never know what it's taken anyone, whatever generation, to get out of bed in the morning. And don't be a dictatorship. Match what you're saying on your PR. You're totally right, Esther. It has to match inside the organization. Be kind to everyone. Be kind. There was a I think it's 2 weeks ago, a cleaner left a letter to the bosses, and they didn't respect this cleaner. You just respect everyone as a human, how you would like to be treated. So I know it's really simple, but my advice to any employer: be decent, be kind, and you'll be surprised what young people will do in return to support and get involved and be passionate towards the mission. I just think kindness is so underrated. And when kindness is put forward, at the moment, it seems to be a trend when everyone's looking. So that's what I've got to add. Be more kind.
Lots of love for that answer, Jack. If I was good at doing that, I'd give it a better shot. Danielle has also said, well said, Jack. So I think that kind of brings us to quite a nice conclusion on the attraction retention side. And I think now moving on to assessment. So we've talked already about hiring for potential. It's almost an obvious statement that we want to hire for potential in role, and yet it seems to be, well, A, very challenging, and B, very much in vogue part of recruitment, that we should be looking for potential in candidates, and particularly in youth and early careers. Lara, know that this is a key focus for Arctic Shores. We'd love to get your perspective on how businesses can best assess for potential.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say there's not necessarily obvious to everybody that you have to hire for potential, and we're still swimming against the current of people asking early careers for a huge amount of experience, a huge amount of insight in how a role should be executed and so forth. So I think there's still a lot of education that needs to be done in terms of really bringing that message home, that if you're not hiring for potential, you're hiring for something that's not necessarily going to predict performance. And it's a very simple equation that you have. And also, I think one of the things that go hand in hand with hiring for potential is enabling people and allowing people to really showcase who they are. And I think when we're looking at the way in which we assess people, sometimes we're asking questions to people. Most of the time we're asking questions. So how do you rate yourself onto these qualities? Or what would you do in this scenario? What happens there is that people stress so much about how they should respond that they're almost censoring their real self. And if you have to think about Millennial Gen Z and how passionate we are and they are about expressing your true self and living by your own identity, those kind of assessment really puts huge dampen on that spirit, right? Because you just keep on trying to work out how should I respond, and what kind of response will give me the highest chances of getting this job, rather than relaxing. So the way in which I've designed the assessment is just relax, relinquish control, respond to the assessment, and show us who you are. And that is stripped of anything that you may have learned, anything that you may have encountered in the past, which means it's stripped at that stage in your career. Is simply stripping the privilege. Because if you're asking people at that stage of the career what you have done, what you have learned, how do you execute certain roles, that equates to people who have had the chance and the opportunities to test themselves onto those roles, to be exposed to that information and knowledge. So I mean, that doesn't really happen in comprehensive, in a London comprehensive. It tends to happen in private school. So really thinking about who the person is, giving them a lot of space to express themselves in a way in which is not stressful as well. It has to be a really nice experience in which the candidates will feel comfortable enough to open themselves to you and show them, this is what I'm bringing to the table. And then the next step is what are you bringing to the table? Like how are you going to support, as Jack and Esther were saying, my mental well-being, my financial well-being, and how are you going to respect that? So I think that's the role of assessment.
Awesome. And we come across a lot of companies who, from a starting position, their assessment processes will do three rounds of interview. And if you're talking to someone who's got an assessment process which is screen CVs, invite people for interviews, make an offer. Couple of questions for all of you. Are there any pieces of advice that you would add to that assessment process to make it more effective to assess for potential? And there are any things that you would suggest or traps that you think people should try to avoid? I'll pass that straight back to you, Lara, if that works.
So first of all, I wanted to actually address something that Jack said about not shouting too much about scrapping the CV, but I think we should. I think in early careers, the CV doesn't say much about the person. So I think that should be a stage that we can really do without. And the way in which CVs are screened is so objective. Even if you think, sorry, it's so subjective.
I was going to say.
Yeah, it's too objective, don't do it. Even if you think you're doing it objectively, the metrics that you're looking at tend to be quite subjective. And also I've received tons of CVs in my life, and people, and I have in my life written my CV really, really quickly because an application was about to end, and my CV would have been literally 3 bullet points. So it doesn't really tell you much about the person at all. And I think having the CV and then jumping straight onto the interview doesn't make sense. You have a massive hole in between. So who is this person? So you only see what this person writes about themselves and how they speak about themselves. And either way is not representative of who they are. And when you get at the interview stage, there's so many things that can go wrong. So I think an interview, like in the old way of doing that, CV and that interview, you end up asking questions that are not necessarily too relevant, judging people on social skills more than anything else. You need to have some objective metrics in between. I'm not saying that it has to necessarily be behavioral-based assessment. You have to have something there in between that says, okay, can I get an idea of the person's quality, skills and passions and attitudes? Then I can use that objective metrics with the interview questions just to corroborate that information, but not to build new information from scratch.
It makes sense. A lot of the work that we do, advocate multifaceted assessment processes so that you can get more data points, more information on the person that you're working with, as well as looking to remove bias throughout the entire assessment process at the same time. Jack, from your perspective, I think when we're looking at multifaceted assessment processes, that there's always a human element. Very rare that there would be an entire hiring process without any human element or interaction at all. How can you make that human interaction as productive as possible when it comes to assessing for potential and making sure that there's a right mutual fit and it goes in both directions, that that person's right for the business and that business is right for that person?
Totally, and what Laura said, rip up the CV for the younger generation and actually hire differently. I think in an interview process, or when we look for a new candidate to come in, we seem to bombard them with all the questions. And I believe that you should make a lot of space for the candidate who's applying for the job to ask you as many more questions than you would ask them. This is not a one-way street. So I think in any process that you go through, there needs to be a big room for questions. Why do we say right at the end of the interview, when the cup of tea is at the end of its cup, and we go, oh, have you got any questions for us? Why isn't the questions being asked throughout as an equal playing field for the candidate coming in? And secondly, I would say in terms of the process, there is bias in it all if you don't put non-biased processes in place. For instance, my assistant at the moment has been promoted internally, and I'm looking for a new assistant. And I've gone to a recruiter because I know that I don't want to be biased to anything. And when we went through the selection process yesterday, I asked this recruiter to remove the names, remove any companies that they work for, and just tell me what they're like as a person. I also didn't want to know anything in terms of how much they're going to cost me, because that automatically puts bias in place as well. When you say, okay, this one's 50K, this one's for 60K, you automatically think, oh, actually that's edging to the more, why is that one more, do we do? And it becomes a business decision in terms of finance rather than the right person. And we've shortlisted 4 candidates to meet me on Friday, face to face. And I said to the recruiter, this is not an interview, this is just a coffee with Jack. That's how it's processioned. A coffee with Jack to see if we both like each other. Because it is getting into, when you go to a new employer, you're getting in a relationship with them. You're going to spend a lot of time with them. So it has to be fair. And you'd be surprised who you actually shortlist when you remove all those things. And out of those 4 lists, you know what? There would be a number of people. There's 2 people on that list that wouldn't have made the cut if I knew where they worked or what, and the bias was put back in. But with the bias not put in, you realise actually we've shortlisted 4 really good candidates. I've got the former PA to Tom Ford and the former PA of Simon Cowell coming to meet me on Friday for an interview. But that would have been biased if I knew they actually worked for those people. They would have went to number 1 and 2 straight away, because that would have been interesting to me, because I like Simon Cowell and Tom Ford. But they were selected based on removing all of the process up front. So that's my advice. I know I've gone on, but just try and take as much bias as you can, even if you don't have the money to buy all these great incentives out there. Just remove the name when you give them to the next person, the line manager.
Well, Jack, do share some stories from those coffees, because I'm sure the PA Simon Cowell will have a few interesting things to share back with us. Conscious of time, we're at 10:54. I just want to share a quick comment. We've talked about bias quite a lot here in the assessment process. We just want to share how stark that is. There was a study done in Germany a few years ago where the same CV applied for identical roles. And the only thing that changed about the CV was the name and the photo on it. And the candidate was 4 times less likely to receive an invite to interview when the name sounded Turkish rather than German, and the lady was wearing a headscarf rather than not wearing a headscarf. So it really is that stark, the bias, and it's not an even playing field at all. Esther, I just want to pass over to you for the last comment on hiring for potential and assessment processes. Are there any things that you've seen work particularly well amongst the 750 or so clients of 10,000 Black Interns?
Yeah, so I think the precedent that I have currently is the execution of 100 Black interns, which, you know, we've rounded up that recruitment process. And I would be interested in kind of having a follow-up conversation about this, or, you know, speaking with Lara directly. I'm not sure in every case how I feel about assessments. Sometimes I feel that assessments, depending on what they are assessing or testing for, can do one of two things: be an unnecessary barrier to entry, and kind of asking things that are not relevant to the role. And in other cases, looking for a particular profile of person to be a culture fit, which I think is quite anti-diversity. So I don't know. I don't know how I necessarily feel about kind of assessing in that way. I'm big on speaking to people and kind of drawing out their experience and drawing out things that they put on the page. I completely agree that at early careers, CVs are much less important, you know, because what's going to be on there, you know, they were, you know, the president of this society, or, you know, they did X, Y, Z, and these are all relevant things to know, but it's much less valuable at the earlier career stage than it is, you know, later on down the line. I think from feedback from some of our participating firms, I definitely know that, again, to back what I'm saying, with a lot of the firms came back to us saying that they were very, very pleasantly surprised when they spoke to candidates, because bearing in mind, this is a restrained candidate pool. We didn't do, at this point in time, extensive work on CVs with the candidates. We're doing that now, but it was kind of like, you know, put in the application. We put a particular slate of candidates in front of each of the firms. So the firms had to choose their candidates from the candidates that we had given them. And the feedback that we received was that the quality of application was absolutely outstanding, but they wouldn't have necessarily known that just by passing through the CVs. So yeah, just evidence to suggest that, you know, CVs may not be the best way forward at the earlier career stage, but also on the assessment point, I think it's more so about how firms use these assessments that I feel we need to be digging into a little bit more.
I wish we had another 15 minutes, but I feel duty bound to pass over to Lara on that point, just to finish us off. I think just quickly share. I think I'm sure you'll agree, Lara. A big part of the assessment process is making sure that you're clear on what you're assessing for in the first instance, and how you do that. I just would love to hear a little bit about how Baltic Shores use that to minimise bias and set things up in the right way. Assessment can work, and yeah, I do wish we had another 15 minutes to debate that one further.
Yeah, me too. I can go on and on for way more than 50 minutes on that topic. So
well, you have 30 seconds or 1 minute. So
that's great. So yes, I hear you, Esther, on everything you say. And the way in which we do things at Arctic Shores, for example, is to really, really focus on what are the make it or break it skills that you need in the role, and ignore everything else. So stop thinking about the ideal candidate who's highly extroverted, highly conscientious, and highly agreeable, because that person doesn't exist. And focusing on those skills may put just a lot of smoke on what is important. And also another thing that I strongly advise against, and you know, that there's one way to fit into your culture, is stop basing your scoring algorithm on your existing workforce. Think about more theoretically about what you want, because what you have is one thing. What you want and what you need is so much more multifaceted. So really disengaging from that obsession with being too data driven. I think we've been once data has penetrated the whole selection space, everybody got super obsessed with data and wanted to start being overly data driven. Sometimes you have to take a step back, especially when you're thinking about culture and thinking about what is culture. It's not the data that I'm getting, is what I'm seeing, what I'm learning, what I'm hearing from people, and building that there. I think I'm over time, but
that's all good.
I want another 10 seconds. The whole thing about the whole thing about talking to people, amazing. But what if you have 200,000 applicants? You can't do that. You have to do what is the next best thing. Strip away all the bias as much as you can and look for potential. You can't speak to everybody. And also, when you speak to everybody, you may have the best intentions, but you're humans. and there's going to be different humans interacting in different ways, perceiving the candidate in a different manner, which means that you're not guaranteeing an objective and repeatable assessment protocol to all your candidates. And that is a problem. As much as the intention may be amazing, in reality, the data that comes out of it is going to be a little bit wobbly.
Amazing. Well, with that, I wish we could carry on for another 10 minutes, but I think with that, I promised everyone we'd be finishing at 11. I'd like to finish off by just saying a massive thanks to all three of you guys, Lara, Esther, Jack. I think you've all contributed so much to this session. Really appreciate it. I'll whack up my my screen now just to share some future webinars that we've got coming up, so please do look out for those and sign up. We've also got extensive insights on lots of topics we've covered today, diversity, otherwise on our website. And yeah, once again, a massive thank you to Lara, Esther and Jack. I thought you were all fantastic, and yeah, really appreciate it, and hope everyone has a great rest of the day.